Doctors here are advising people to take their flu jabs for protection against concurrent infection of both COVID-19 and the flu. The recommendation is you should get your flu shot 14 days before or after the COVID-19 vaccine. This is particularly timely with Singapore easing travel restrictions and opening borders to countries with colder weather. With the new vaccinated travel lanes, more Singapore residents will be travelling during the year-end winter season that typically brings about a spike in flu cases in the Northern Hemisphere. Plus, as those countries have less stringent COVID-19 rules, this could mean travellers are more exposed to the flu and risk bringing it back to Singapore. Let's discuss this with Dr. Leong Hoe Nam, an infectious diseases physician from the Rophi Clinic. So, Dr. Leong, let's say I went overseas and caught the flu. How would you assess the risk of my spreading it to other people here, given that, we still have safe management measures like wearing masks?
That is a great question. I mean, wearing masks, that actually helps prevent influenza. It does. But if you actually look at the studies, masks in the prevention of influenza has not been giving us good results. Within the household, if I have the influenza, I can still spread the virus to other people, even though I might be wearing the mask at home. And that's solid data coming up from Europe and, of course, Hong Kong. Now, second thing about it is influenza does kill, especially the elderly. And you have an elderly at home whom you want to protect. You really want to avoid getting influenza when you're traveling overseas, and keep your holiday disease-free. And lastly, the hospitals. The hospitals are busy as it is, the doctors are busy as it is, so are the nurses. If you fall sick with an influenza-like illness, you get swabbed and assessed for COVID-19, when in truth you have influenza and you're adding burden to the illness. So get prevention, prevent influenza, and have a great holiday.
So, Doctor, there is a risk of getting influenza overseas and spreading it when you come back. So, how to mitigate it? What precautions do I take before travelling to colder climates? And what can I do when I come back to Singapore?
I like the question, and the answer is very simple. The same as what we are doing with COVID-19 now. When we do social distancing, when we do masks, we actually reduce the risk of transmission of influenza to other people. So continue doing that. But in addition, you can take the influenza vaccine. Now, influenza vaccine is different from the COVID virus vaccine because they are completely different viruses. So get yourself vaccinated with the influenza virus vaccine before you go over. That will be great. Mind you, this is a little bit of advertisement for influenza vaccines. It does reduce down the risk of strokes, reduce down the risk of heart attacks, reduce down the risk of death. So it pays to actually get vaccinated.
Okay, so Doctor, a final question for you. You mentioned already, social distancing, mask wearing, and those have helped to protect us from other respiratory virus infections like the flu. Usually I get the flu bug from my kids a couple of times a year. But now that, none of us have fallen ill in the last 2 years thanks to the measures that we brought up earlier, does that mean our natural immunity to influenza has waned as well?
That's a good question. The answer is yes, our immunity to influenza, if it's exactly the same virus which we have met and fought previously before, we will be able to cope with it. But the influenza virus is always mutating, always adapting. So every time there will be a new challenge to influenza, yes, you're right, we will seem to have lower immunity. That's because we have not been exposed to the latest virus. But in truth, our immunity is the same. It's just that we have not been challenged repeatedly, and hence we have not been updated to the most recent infection. And just a little bit of point of correction here, where you say you have the flu bug, actually it most likely was a cold bug. Most of the time it's still not influenza. About half the time it is a cold virus, and it could be other coronaviruses besides COVID-19. There are things like respiratory syncytial viruses, parainfluenza viruses, and metapneumoviruses. So besides COVID and influenza, there are a whole host of other viruses that can give us the cough, cold, and runny nose.